Welcome, ahlan wa sahlan to all on behalf of the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory and Center for Advanced Studies on Population and Religion at the Krakow University of Economics. My name is Konrad Pędziwiatr, and together with Karolina Sobczak-Szelc and Dobrosława Wiktor Mach, I should lead and moderate today's seminar devoted to a very pertinent theme of Iraqi internal and external migrations. I shall very briefly introduce the theme and our distinguished speakers today, Bashir Said and Lonsine Eric Diop. And then before giving them the floor, also invite Karolina Sobczak-Szelc to say a few words about the FUME project within which the presented data were produced. So Iraqi internal and external migrations are the theme of our today's seminar. Massive population displacements, both internal and external, have been part of the lived experience of Iraqis for decades, mainly due to war, civic unrests and attacks. This is especially the case for Kurds, whose social and political persecution have shaped the development of the Kurdistan region of Iraq since 1980s. This region is therefore a very interesting case to capture the complexity migration trajectories and temporalities. The main urban center of the Kurdistan region, such as Duhoq, represent on the one hand an economic attraction for other rural areas in the region, mainly affected by unemployment and decline in farming productivity. On the other hand, the Kurdistan region is perceived as a safe haven for Kurdish fearing and fleeing persecution, particularly for the IDPs originated from Mosul and Baghdad. Furthermore, the geographical positioning of the Kurdistan region makes the region a strategic stepping stone for further regular and irregular international migration towards Europe. One of the latest episodes of this migration we have been observing this year with the arrival of thousands of migrants from Iraq and also elsewhere on tourist visas to Belarus, and then the attempts, sometimes successful, sometimes not, to enter the EU through Belarusian Polish, Belarusian Lithuanian, Latvian border. Our speakers will talk today about the dynamics of decision-making process to migrate internally and internationally, and to stay in Iraq, and explore motivations, aspirations, and the role of urban neighborhoods in the migration chain, both with a local and international perspective, especially in relation to Europe as a destination and the importance, the perception and attractiveness of Europe. So without further ado, I would like now to pass the floor and the most importantly, before passing the floor to Karolina, the short bios of our speakers. So Bashir Said is the head of the Department of Spatial Planning at the University of Duhoq in Kurdistan Region, Iraq, and he's the holder of PhD degree in Urban and Regional Planning and Design from University of Maryland College Park in USA. He's been a former consultant at the World Bank and a former director of the Department of Land Surveying at the municipality of Duhoq. He has urban and regional planning research experience in Europe, Middle East, Philippines, and the United States on various subjects, including transportation and the land use planning, human settlements, and the rural urban migration. The second speaker is Lonsine Eric Diop, who is assistant professor at the Department of Politics and Society at the University of Aalborg, Denmark. Lonsine holds a PhD in human, economic and regional geography from the University of Paris, 10. Before joining Aalborg University, He was a research fellow at the Luxembourg Institute of Social Economic Research, and his research focus on international migration drivers and policies of host countries, migration native contacts and its consequences on integration. And Lancinet has also extensive experience in conducting research in several European countries, including France, Luxembourg, Germany, Belgium, Denmark, and some African countries such as Tanzania, Senegal, as well as in the Middle East. So now, before passing the floor to distinguished speakers, a few words from Karolina Sobczak-Szelc about the FIUM project. Karolina, the floor is yours. We can't hear you, Karolina.
And I said so many words.
Yes.
Thank you, Konrad, for this introduction. And please confirm that you can see all the presentation in the full mode screen. Yes. Just shortly before the results, information about and that they were carried under the project financed by EU from H2020. It is one of the 3 projects funded under the call Understanding Migration Mobility Patterns, elaborating mid and long-term migration scenarios. The aim of the consortium consists of 11 partners, and the leading partners is Aalborg University. Krakow Economic University is one of partners, as well as the others. The aim, the film will focus on understanding the patterns, motivations, and modalities of migrants at multiple geographical scales, from international through regional to local, and on imagining possible futures. And its aim is to determine the major factors explaining migrant movements patterns by analyzing regional and local circumstances that either attract migrants or push potential migrants to move. And additionally, it will elaborate how possible futures, regional socio-demographic, economic, and environmental challenges may shape future migrant movement patterns in Europe. Our expected outputs, there are 4 of them: migrant scenarios, projection based on scenarios, open source spatial simulation tool, and policy briefing materials. Precisely those research that are going to be, or research that are going to be presented today, were part of the project and part of one of those work packages, so-called, and with the aim to study how local circumstances, precisely in Iraq at this time, affect the decision to migrate in countries of origin, and how those local circumstances influence the choice of a place for settlement in destination countries. Iraq is one of 4 case studies that were under investigation. Tunisia was presented more or less a month ago, and as far as I know, Ukraine will be the next in January. So the last one will be Senegal. With desk research, analysis of data, secondary data, and then in-depth interviews about which Lancinet and Bashi are going to say more. So this will be all from my side, and with those words, I give the floor to our speakers.
Yes, Bashir, you can start the presentation if you want now. Well, you have around 45 minutes max for your presentation, which will be followed by Q&A.
Yeah. Lansen, do you want me to share and then?
Yes, yeah, you can start, and then I can. Okay. You can just leave the PowerPoint so I can follow.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, as Carolina has already given an introduction about the aim of the project, just to repeat that, Iraq being one case study, the aim is to analyze the migration dynamic from the point of view of the decision-making process, how these people of Iraq choose to migrate, whether internally or decide to migrate externally or decide to stay. And the rationale for this is to look into migration as a cultural and social process in which migrants and non-migrants are active subjects, and there is no purely external or economic causality or purely subjective reason that lead to this migration. The specific research question for the case studies, probably for others as well, the first question is which local factor drive migration propensities? The second, and how does this urban experience, people, especially those who migrate from rural areas to urban centers, how does that experience influence their decision to choose to migrate or stay? How do migration process, the third question, how does migration process work, and how specific factor, meso or micro factors impact on the decision to migrate or stay? And the thematic areas of this research is the motivations, aspirations, propensities of being mobile or to stay, the relationship between city and migration with respect to the development of imaginaries, projections, and trajectories of migration, especially to Europe and other parts, the urban neighborhood as a framework for the analysis of the causes of Iraqi international migration. So if we look into a background on why we select, I mean, for this study, we've selected Iraqi Kurdistan as a particular case within Iraq, and particularly two main urban centers in Duhoq province. This is Duhoq city, Duhoq urban area, and Zakho city. These are the two largest cities in Duhoq province or Duhoq governorate. So I will exchangeably use province and governorate. That's the terminology we use for these provinces or legal districts. So the Duhoq and Zakho are considered the trade gate between Iraq and Turkey. So it's basically the hub where many Iraqis come and use it as a launch point to travel or to migrate abroad if they choose to. And Kurdistan in general is the most fertile part of Iraq due to its relatively high annual precipitation. I would say not so much now, but I mean, relatively speaking, it has higher precipitation than other parts of Iraq. The highly mobile population due to armed conflict that was also given in the introduction, and Kurdistan has been subject to many armed conflicts, not only from the invasions, but also internally from the previous regime. After the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003, the political stability and rapid economic development has been the case, relatively, again speaking. Duhoq and Zakho are also important destination of internal migration, as I explained. And Duhoq and Zakho also are significant starting point and stepping stone for international migration. Again, because it's usually Turkey is the pathway to Europe. So looking into some background context of the case study area and Iraq in general. So looking into the country level environmental characteristics. Well, the climate in Iraq varies geographically. If you're in the north, compared when you're in the central Iraq or southern Iraq, you will have completely different experience and in terms of the climate and the weather. Central and southern Iraq have a subtropical climate with mild winters and very hot summers. And most of the country classify it as arid to semi-arid land. And you can see from this map, these regions, we roughly classify them to these three different regions. In terms of climate, you have in the north where Duhoq province is, the climate is subtropical desert. In the center, this number 2 region is more on subtropical steppe climate, and in the south and the central where also Baghdad is, these are more dry summer subtropical climates. Only 27% of the land surface in the country is suitable for farming, and only 60% of those 27% of land is farmed. Probably less now, but we have a problem with data accuracy. So the most environmental challenges we have, there is continuous increase in drought frequencies, especially in the hottest region of central and southwestern Iraq. That have reduced agricultural production by 30% on average, and also contributed to high desertification of arable land. So during summertime, it's quite common to see the sandstorms, mainly because of this desertification. When there is a wind, you always have sand even coming to Kurdistan region. Water availability is also one major issue and challenge. So in the major two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, the level continued to decline, partly due to drought, but I would say now alarmingly due to the high dam construction activities in Turkey and also in Iran, because there are some also streams coming to the rivers. So this has actually been expected to cause the next conflict in the region. The next conflict in the region will be mainly due to water. And also one of other environmental challenges is the lack of clean water for household usage, largely due to aging water infrastructure. So infrastructure in general is in poor condition, especially water and also the sewage system, drainage system, and so on. Some compounding factors that actually contribute even further to these worsening these environmental conditions are rapid population growth. Family planning is very poor still in Iraq in general. War and conflict in the past 2 decades have also contributed to exacerbating environmental condition. Climate change is a global phenomenon. Poor land use planning is also one of the very poor, I would say, aspect in Iraq in general. Also encroachment on fragile ecosystems, so encroachment on forests and agricultural land is an ongoing process, and this is mainly can be tied to these poor land use planning activities. A more recent environmental problem is the poor water quality, and also quantities of water are in decline. So there will be probably within 5 to 10 years a big issue with availability of water. Soil salinity air pollution, and also inadequate waste management practices. These are all compounding other environmental problems that add to this issue. When we look more regionally into Kurdistan in specific and Duhoq province as part of that semi-autonomous region, so semi-autonomous meaning Kurdistan has its own government, system of government, parliament, prime minister. The only shared aspect between the Iraqi Kurdistan region and Iraqi central, or the other part of Iraq, is the budget sharing aspect. So Kurdistan gets 17% of the budget, and that has to be centrally allocated. Again, Kurdistan, like the rest of Iraq, is a region rich in oil, which can be a positive and a negative side. In Duhoq governorate, less than 20% of the population are involved in agriculture, a very small percentage, with only half of that percentage actually depend on agriculture as the main source of income. So even many farmers, more than probably half or more, depends on other source of livelihood. And the rural urban migration due to environmental reason is marginal. And this has been also studied. There was a study by Lina Juklund from Lund University at the time, and I was the research assistant. We have done data collection for more than 1,000 individuals from rural areas. And it was obvious from that study that migration, rural urban migration, due to environmental reason, were very marginal. There were other social, economic, and political reasons that were at play for that as a cause of that migration. When we look into the demographic, one problem we have with data in general, even when I do research in this region in Iraq, is the lack of census. So the last census was done in 1989, and since we have had no complete census in Iraq. So all the figures are based on estimates, and you would find some contradiction if you look into different sources of these estimates. But the most estimates put Iraq population between 38 to 40 million people. Estimated annual population growth is about 2.8%, probably more if we have a complete census, because by observation, if you look into the high population among the young people, so Iraq is a very young country, one of the top probably in terms of this youth age percentage worldwide, with nearly 60% of the population being under the age of 25. And the concentration of the population, as you can see in this map, you would see the most concentration is along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So up from Duhoq, you can see here it's a bit small, but that's Duhoq, and all the way down to Baghdad and to Basra in the very south. So you would see on the west part of Iraq is sparsely populated. If we look into the level of urbanization in Iraq and KRI, or Kurdistan Region of Iraq, between 1977 to up to 2004, these are data from the Kurdistan Region Statistical Office. You would see in Iraq about 70% of Iraqi, as of 2014 or 18, live in urban areas. You see in this graph or this diagram that in Kurdistan is a bit higher than the average of Iraq. And that's mainly because of other factors that were at play specifically for Kurdistan region that pushed many people from the villages to move to urban areas. If you don't know from back then, during Saddam times, there were more than 3,000 villages destroyed in Kurdistan, and there was some sort of forced rural-urban migration. In anywhere in the world, the rural-urban migration more or less was a environmental, economic push factor or pull factor from urban centers. But in Kurdistan, there was a very unique circumstances in the 80s, 70s and 80s, where there were extreme push from rural areas because of village destruction, mainly because of political reasons. Rapid urbanization in Iraq was not only driven again by this economic factors, but due to all these other conflicts and economic sanction, the United Nations in the 90s, there was probably one of the worst period that impacted the economy and also this dynamics of rural-urban migration. This UN economic sanction lasted for about 10 years. And then later there was this the Gulf War, US invasion in 2003, and followed by many other crises like ISIS crisis in 2014. So you see here in Duhoq, the level of urbanization is on the rise, and a bit less than it is in Sulaimania and Erbil, which are other two major cities in Kurdistan region. And that's because still there are more people relative to other parts of Kurdistan that live in rural areas. If we look into the sociocultural context, it's again another complexity layer added to Iraq's situation. It's not like anywhere in the Arab world that you find this high diversity in terms of ethnicity and religion. So households in Iraq in general often consist of several generations living together. So there's a very strong social network in terms of families. The Muslim makes up the majority, 97% of the country population, but within those within that religion or Muslim Islam, there are two main sects, Shia and Sunnis. And as you can see from this map, Sunni make up, Shia make up the majority of the Iraqi population, around 60%, but Sunnis are around 37 to 40%, because Sunni Kurds are also majority Sunni Muslims. And in this map, you see where are their concentration. So more or less, they are regionally, they are territorially divided. Shia being on the southeast part of Iraq, neighboring Iran, which makes sense. And in the north, you would see the majority of Kurds are actually in the north. And also in this map, you would see there are other minorities like Turkmen, Yazidis, Christians, Syrian, and so on. When we look into the economic context, the economy in Iraq is largely state-run. So there is still a high centrality in Iraq and Kurdistan, even though Kurdistan has been pushing for more decentralization, more on the paper than in practice, I would say. And there is a heavy reliance on oil industry. The government revenues make up 90% of based on oil revenues, which is a very, very large percentage. And that's why if we think about the future, Iraq is very susceptible. If there is any problems, any economic aspect related to oil industry, and we see that the world is pushing away from oil, Iraq will have some serious problems. And Iraq has also an economic or employment culture that is also heavily reliant on the government. So government employee make up around, there's no exact figure, but maybe around 80 to 90% of the employment is actually government. And that means that we have a very weak private sector and also entrepreneurship culture. In Kurdistan is getting a bit better. There's a push for privatization and more emphasis on the private sector, but there are some political issues in that regard, which are a bit sensitive to talk about. Yeah, I mean, Kurdistan is a democratic society. We have a constitution that push for freedom of expression, and but if you look into the reality, the government actually has even a large hand in even private sectors, especially those that are very influential. There is also a high unemployment rate. More than a third of young people of Iraq age between 15 and 24 are unemployed. This figure differs from one location to another. If you look into, and that's what make even Duhoq an interesting, Duhoq province an interesting case study, because in this governorate or province, the unemployment rate is quite high. So if you see from this map, Duhoq and one other province in Iraq, Nisan, they have the highest unemployment rates. Here estimated to be around 16 to 17%, but in reality, we always say, and we observe that it must be higher than that. So you can see, for example, in this table, the Duhok Zakho city in Duhok province has the highest or one of the highest unemployment percentage in the country of 24%. So that's about what we expect, what we estimate that we have in the region. A very high unemployment rate because of very high young population and also high reliance on government employment, and the government now of Iraq and Kurdistan have frozen government employment since 2015, since at the time of ISIS, and to date, the government doesn't provide employment. So that is not there, and private sector is weak, so you have a high unemployment rate that we see now. When we look into the political context, I've already mentioned many of the aspects that have also tied to socioeconomic and environmental conditions. If we look into the timeline of this political issues, it started way before 2003. You have in the 70s and 80s, even 60s with Kurdistan, there was a continuous dispute between the Kurdistan region with the Iraqi central government that led to also some conflicts, destruction of villages, and forced rural urban migration. Then you have the fall of Saddam in 2003, which was a milestone for Iraq's future. In 2005, there was civil unrest and terrorist attack. There was dispute between also the different religious sects within Iraq. There was a growing influence of jihadists and attack on Christian in Mosul in 2018, which systematically later led into the appearance of ISIS and the invasion of Mosul, and then spread out to other part of the region. So I think I can give the floor to Lassen to continue from here. Lassen, is it?
Thank you, Bashir, for your presentation. It's very well done. I think, can you see me now? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Bashir, for your presentation. I won't go into the historical part. I would, for my part, just present what we actually did within the framework of the film project. And I am involved in actually 2 case studies, which is Senegal and Iraq. And actually, that was a huge opportunity to see actually how drivers of migration are completely different, and the perspective are so different from one region to another. But basically, I won't go back into presenting the film project because I think Carolina did that very well in the beginning. But I would just quickly describe which people did we interview and what kind of preliminary result do we have after our interviews in Iraq. So thanks to Bashir and his team in Duhok University, they conducted 30 interviews with a lot of difficulties due to the COVID-19. So, but anyway, they managed to complete the task. But basically, we had a very wide range of age of people that we interviewed, from 19 to 75 years old. But most of the interviewees were 29 years old or younger. So that's more or less around 22 people. So actually, we have quite a biased sample composed of many students, but also young people. We have also like quite a good balance between female and male, despite the fact that it's actually sometimes difficult to talk to female interviewees separately to their family. So so that's something that it was actually very nice to have a perspective of women in the sample. We have actually a wide range of different professional categories: taxi driver, restaurant employees, and shopkeepers. And the idea was to also to look at not only the diversity in profile, but also in temporality. When I say temporality, I mean we had in the film project the perspective of looking at people that came to the city with different time frame, and to see if actually staying in the city for different set of time could actually trigger or hamper international migration decision. So sometimes we assume that these cities are just a stepping stone for migrating abroad, but it could be that some of these people settle in the city and do not really want to go anywhere else. So it was maybe to capture the variety of migration temporalities and the complexity of those of migration decision, depending on how much time you have stayed in the city. So we have 3 set of profile: people that stay 10 years or more in the city, 5 years, or 5 to 9 years, and then less than 5 years. So, okay, this is a kind of very difficult. I think we have discussed this in the film project. It's just some decision that we made in the film project to look at. I think 10 years, it's really something that you have time to settle and to sometime to find employment in the city. So if you can move the slide to the next, Bashir. I think I don't have control of it. Oh, okay. So we did some migrant interview, but also we did some key expert interviews. People that actually have knowledge about migration in the Kurdistan Iraqi. And so we have interviewed 5 people, 1 university professor or associate adjunct professor, which is assistant professor, some representative from the IOM, and then expert at rich migration. So can you, Bashir? So we, as I said before, we have actually faced a lot of challenges regarding the interviews. We have, of course, overrepresentation of settled migrants and long stays, which actually make sense if you look at what describing before, that many Kurdish Zakho due to specific conflicts that happen in Mosul and Baghdad. So there was a huge wave of migrants that left Baghdad back after 2003, and then you have the recent ISIS crisis in Mosul that actually led many Turkish, probably mainly the Yazidis and the Christians who fled Mosul to come to Duhok and Zakho. So that's actually, and you could see afterwards in a figure that I show later how these two origin are overrepresented in the sample. So you have actually in the left some of the origin of the people that we interviewed, and then on the center the city where they live right now, where we did the interviews, and on the right it's actually something about where do they, if they had the opportunity to move, where do they want to go around the world. This was actually to measure the perception and the attraction, the relative attractivity of destinations such as Europe in the eyes of migrants, or potential migrants. The reason that we did this was actually that we realized that migration is just not something that it's kind of not a linear project where you get up and then you can just go and migrate or go and ask for a visa. Most people do not have like clear projects, but they dream of maybe if there was a possibility of migrating, where would they want to go? So you have a lot of people coming from Mosul, and most importantly the present province of Nineveh. Bashir, can you go back? Okay, Bashir, can you hear me? Bashir? Yeah, thank you. So the governor of Nineveh, and actually from two places, Shingal and Mosul. So if you have 8 informants in Zakho came from Baghdad, and 2 went to Duhoq. So that's the size of the node represent the number of people that went from one place to another. Of course, you may say that in terms of qualitative interviews, like representing the number doesn't make sense, but this is just sometime to capture the perception and the dynamics of people. It has no, of course, not scientific validity in terms of generalizing these kind of flows. But what transfer in the interview is that actually most people would choose to move to Duhok and Zakho because of course, the peaceful, the peace that they can have there, because it's the only kind of semi-autonomous Kurdistan region where they can actually have a bit of freedom, and where they can be relatively protected from persecution. But what was actually also like a bit shocking is that we didn't perceive that actually these places were actually real transition for later international migration. So they were not like clear set project that, okay, they will stay 2 years and then they will move abroad. This is also because, as I said before, Europe is a kind of unattainable dream kind of from the interviews, because when people ask when we ask interviewees, did you ask for a visa or whatever, they never did that. And when you ask them, did you try illegal migration, then they say it's too risky. So, but you will say to me that, okay, maybe it's there is a bias in terms of the education level of people that we interview, which maybe make them more cautious about trying irregular migration. Bashir, thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, okay. So we some of the preliminary result that we have regarding, for instance, people that migrated to from some of the other region, mainly actually we have realized that there are two set of profile. People that migrated for economic opportunities are mainly originating from other area of Iraqi Kurdistan. So they would move to the city because of issues with unemployment, but also, and we'll see that later, because of actually there was economic issues that was affected by some, for instance, in some places it was the burning of the like man-made fire that affected actually people ability to have access to arable land, which in turns affected the economic outcome, which led them to migrate to the city. So that's the first type of profile, and one of the female migrant from Zakho puts it in this word: in the city there are more opportunities to realize your desire, to find job you want, the job that you want, to get the degree you want, to live an independent life. There is a big difference between the life of a woman in a rural area and the life of a woman living in a city. Women in cities have more opportunities to go to school, work, and be independent without people interfering in their lives. So this is actually very interesting for the gender perspective regarding the dichotomy between rural and cities. Another male interview that is quite young, also 19 years old. Back then, Duhoq was very developed and the situation was much better than other places. Job opportunities were available in Duhoq. That's why people left Ibrahim Khalil. So this is a migrant that left from a small area, still in Kurdistan, Iraqi, but to move to the city. But when they say back then the job opportunity was much better, actually, you have to put that into perspective with what Bashir was talking about before, that unemployment is a big issue now in these in Duhoq and Zakho, in general, in the Kurdistan Iraq in general. So we have also like migration from other governorate to Duhoq, which are mainly actually due to sectarian violence and ISIS attack, for instance, in 2014. And just as an idea of some of the narrative that we have, there is a female migrant 24 that have stayed longer in the city and left left in 2014 in Mosul. So she puts it in the word: in August of 2014, Daesh attacked Shingal. We were forced to leave our home, and this was the reason. We left many things there, such as memory, friends, and native region, which altogether were psychologically difficult. Another Muslim, Kurdish Muslim, also like points out this one left Baghdad. The major reason that me and my family left the city of Baghdad in the first place was because of ethnic persecution. They were always against Kurds having freedom and a free separate state from Iraq. This means that life as Kurds would never improve, and we would have to make difficult decisions to leave. So it's this kind of quote summarizes a little bit how people felt when they left these regions. When it comes to environmental region, the impact of some of the like, for instance, clear environmental factors such as erosion and drought are not cited as primary reason for migrating. That is because actually sometimes there is not a clear line between the impact of drought or erosion or kind of issues that are environmental driven migration and economic migration. Because once people have decreased productivity, they consider sometimes that they move for economic reasons. So the two are kind of interlinked, but sometimes it doesn't appear in the speech of migrants whether actually the root cause of moving for economic reason is environmental. However, there is some people like highlighting that they had problem with access to arable land because there was attacks in the village, and all the crop were burned, and they could not simply increase their productivity or have some land to grow crops in. Other migrants have highlighted also that the fact that the government, there were issues with government paying them some, because they provide crops to the government and they have to get money back, and some of them didn't get money back, so they were forced to move because they could not simply survive with the farming. Could we move to the next slide, Bashir?
I think that was the last slide.
I think that was the last one. So
yeah.
we this is actually only preliminary result. I think we have more extensive result regarding the drive of migration. But what is actually apparent in the expert and the migrant interview is that there is a shift of the reason to migrate from mainly sectarian violence driven migration to now more economic driven migration, which actually may push more young people to move to Europe, not because they're persecuted like in the previous decades, but more because of unemployment and lack of opportunities in the Kurdistan Iraqi region. But also in the future, I think that's what is apparent in the expert interviews, that the most damning issue for the future could be water issues and access to water, because some of this conflict for river access between the countries forming like around that region, like Turkey and Iraq, would have consequences in the future in terms of access to water. So that is more or less a brief idea of what we did for Iraq, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bashir and Alcine, for super interesting presentation. Now I'm opening up Q&A to all the participants. You can, Bashir, stop sharing so as we have a better screen of all of us. Yeah, thank you very much. Please raise your hands, ask your questions on the chat, or let us know on the chat that you want to ask questions live, and I'll give you the floor, the possibility to do so. While awaiting the questions to our speakers to appear, I'll, as a chair, I'll take the privilege to ask the first sort of warm-up questions to both Bashir and Alcine. So, in your presentation, Bashir, you have shown quite clearly some of the key moments in the country's history that have played an important role in internal and external migrations. But one element I lacked in this presentation, namely the unfulfilled national aspirations and self-governing aspirations in Kurdistan. And what I mean here especially is the referendum and the follow-up of the referendum. I was wondering to what extent these unfulfilled national aspirations have been a driver for migration. I know it's a very big sort of complex issue which I'm tackling now, but I think it'll be important to mention this episode and how this has been playing out in the especially external, obviously, migrations. And this leads me to the second point, which has to do with the, again, external migrations. By and large, the largest group of migrants that emerged in Belarus over the last months have been from Iraq. The vast majority are Iraqis. Thousands of them have made successfully to Western European countries, to Germany and elsewhere. We do not have a full picture yet how many of them have managed to reach their friends, families, keens in various Western European countries. But we definitely know, and the German statistics are clear about it, that we are talking about thousands of people, and yet many are stuck in Belarus. Again, here the picture is not fully clear, but I'm interested in internal sort of Iraqi debates about especially those people that are stuck experts, generally Iraqi society think about this whole situation. We know from other type of movements that return is very much linked with stigma. So of unsuccessful migration. I wonder how is this being played out in the public debates in Iraq. If you could give us some hints, insights about this situation, that would be very great. So just two, I have many more, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion. So I want to now give the chance also to Dobrosława to ask her question, and to Karol, because I see these two hands now appearing, and then I will give you the floor, Bashir, to answer. And also I would like to take the opportunity to introduce to all of the speakers our PhD student, Rashid, who is there. So Rashid, feel free to join the discussion in terms of giving your perspective on the situation. So Dobrosława.
I want to start by saying big thanks to our guests, Bashir and Nansine, for fantastic presentation. It's really insightful, and it really gives a lot of insights into dynamics migration. I would have two questions. The first one would go deeper into the question, into one of aspects Konrad asked, mainly the Polish-Belarusian border. As we know, as it seems, the majority of migrants who are at the border, who are coming to the border, were from Iraq, but most of them, most probably, they are from Iraqi Kurdistan. So this is what is interesting. Of course, we don't have full data, but it's quite apparent from the people who talk to those people at the border. So I'm in fact interested in a topic that was not really precisely the topic of your research, but maybe you have some knowledge about that. Like, is there, if you could compare a bit the migration from Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq, I mean, do you see if there are any significant patterns that are different between migration of Arabs from Iraq and the Kurdish population? Because it was, in some discussions I had in Kurdistan, it was sometimes raised that, in fact, Kurds are more inclined to migrate. There was even a thesis or an argument that, in fact, in Kurdistan, we can speak of kind of culture of migration, meaning that there is more like willingness to migrate in response to difficult situations. Because, for instance, the economic situation, yeah, in Kurdistan is more developed. In fact, Arab people go to Kurdistan because they move there also for economic reasons and for others. So, in fact, why do Kurds seem to leave more often? This would be my first question. And the second one related to the topic of unemployment. Yes, which you said in some districts it's particularly high. I just had one observation that kinds of is interesting to me and intriguing. In fact, when I was visiting Kurdistan this November, I noticed that there are quite a lot of immigrants, in fact, in Kurdistan from Asian countries, from a variety of Asian countries, working in Kurdistan. How does this relate to the unemployment and to immigration of Kurds? So this will to my two question. I give floor to Karol, and I see I'm sure Rashid will have a lot of comments as we discuss the topic of migration a lot in Erbil. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'd just like to begin as well with thanking for a very interesting presentation of very important research project. Just to give you a context on our questions, me and Dobrosława are part of a research project on Kurdish women's activism called Acid Fem, together with the University of Oslo. I encourage everyone to visit our website, kurdishstudies.pl, and there's also some information on Kaspar website. And during our research, our colleague, Dr. Kaziva Salih, has also made an observation that sometimes the legal status inside Bashur, so inside the South Kurdistan, can be very deterministic towards one situation, especially the migrants. As for example, we have Rojhelati Kurds, so a group of Kurds who were migrated from Iranian Kurdistan, and they usually are based in camps or in districts. They they only have temporary residence permit that is recognized only by South Kurdistan, so no official recognition by Iraqi state. Moreover, it not only determines their situation in regards to migration, but also to everyday life, as to obtain an official license for being a specialist. They have to obtain a state license, and they cannot do this because they are stateless. And in regards to migration, this also happens in regards to the situation that they are not treated as eligible for being a refugee by UN office, as the South Kurdistan is treated as a safe region. So so this legal situation can be very important. And I just like to ask, sorry for this long context, have you observed something similar among your respondents as you interviewed people inside South Kurdistan? So what was their legal status? Was it somehow limiting their mobility or everyday life? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Carol. Rashid? Close your spot, please. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Rashid, would you like Bashir? Just 1 second. I want to give a floor. Oh, you want Rashid after Bashir? What's the?
I mean, he can ask the question, Rashid.
Go ahead, Bashir. Rashid, go ahead first.
Actually, he's not a question, as you mentioned, Dr. Bashir. I will coming to the sensitive issue that maybe you will not mention. You not mentioned it. So, in my point of view, I believe that there are another issues that make people from Kurdistan region migrated to Europe. So one of them, the unfair distribution of wealth in Kurdistan region is clearly visible. So, so this is one of the issues that some elites are blatantly over consuming, while many are barely managing their basic needs. In other words, the growing division of Kurdistan region is due more to wealth inequality than to politics when it comes to the ruling class in society. So, however, the benefits that elites may reap from controlling the interior economy help maintain this status for sure. The combination of wealth inequality and rampant corruption in Kurdistan region has had severe negative impact on the region's youth. So the most of immigrants actually lost their confidence in the region's institutions, whether in the system of government, elections, the economy, or even the education. So overall, it becomes a common belief among them that the realization that their dreams would be only through immigration to Europe or the North America. So that's my main notes, and thank you for the chance and the time that you give me. Thank you, Dr. Bashir. Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you very much, Rashid. Thank you. Now, this is a very, very important additional point. If you want Bashir also to sort of reflect on what Rashid Zand said, that will be also appreciated. So,
Okay.
Who goes first, Bashir or Lonsine?
I would quickly jump towards what Rashid said, because I think that's more recent. And just to, I think Rashid, you have a good point. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah.
It's everything fine.
Rashid, and I think the point of Rashid joins a little bit what Terborsa was saying. I think what regarding what you're saying, actually, you both have a good point, and actually, what Rashid is saying transpired it came out in our interviews that actually there is this doubt about and corruption. The young people that at least we interviewed, they're really frustrated about about ill management of public resources and about also the institution. But the consequence of that is rapid increase of unemployment. So basically, when we say unemployment, of course, the deep cause of it, it's of course the mismanagement of resource, and of course, when it's kind of oil-driven economy, then of course those resources can easily be subject to corruption and so on. So you have a good point, Rashid. And what actually what transpired in our interviews that this unemployment, actually the young people that we interviewed, they voice issue unemployment, and they would rather leave and try the chance in Europe because it's so hard to find an opportunity when they have been having going to having good education, graduating, but still have difficulties finding a job, and government jobs are actually limited. So there is not, the private sector is very underdeveloped, and therefore there is no there is not really like some kind of clear way of making it in the private sector. And that's actually one of the, in relation to the one of the major point that came throughout the interview is that they were referring to wage dumping. So basically what they were saying that is that not only there is issue of unemployment, but the pressure from refugees coming from outside, for instance, from Syria to the Kurdistan Iraqi, add some extra pressure in the labor market, because now the wealthy people can recruit some refugees and pay them at very low wage that local people would have trouble accepting. So that create extra pressure, because then instead of recruiting locals, they will recruit refugees at very low cost. So I don't know if that answered to both kind of Dobrosa and Rashid your questions. Bashir, maybe you can answer to the others, to the question.
Yeah, I mean, these are all excellent questions and comments. I will go one by one, starting with Conrad's question about the referendum in 2017. It's difficult to say, but I don't think that has by itself contributed to any changes in migration. Because that was more of a wish than how you say it. It wasn't systematic. The referendum by many educated people in Kurdistan and abroad, they thought that it wasn't the right time. It was just a wish that many Kurds would like to have, but they knew it's not the time for it. So at least that's the perspective and the perspective of many people that I work with. And I don't think that was per se have contributed to changes in this migration dynamics. For those who have migrated to Russia, again, based on the comment made by Rashid Lance, for me, migration of Kurds is more of a status than the actual necessity. And that's the observation we make, again, many of us, for those who have migrated and stuck in Russia. I don't think Kurds are, even though there is a high unemployment, they're not in poverty. Most of those who migrate, they're not in poverty. If they look for a job, they may find it, but it will not be. It's not satisfactory. That satisfaction is the problem. Because you can compare in Kurdistan as compared to the rest of Iraq, which takes me to the question that Dobroslava, I don't know, sorry about pronouncing the name, has asked about why there is a difference. There is actually indeed difference between Iraq and Kurdistan dynamics. People in Kurdistan, they can see the difference, and that's usually what pushes people to migrate and look for a better status. you see that many people around you are are getting wealthy from the resources that Kurdistan has. And then you are just standing in your position, not going forward. That's actually the most, I would say, for most people, that's the driver to change that status, to have some connection outside and then do something in the future. I mean, again, the result, the outcome might not be as, most probably will not be as expected. That takes me to the second point, the status again. People who have migrated, and I mentioned how the ties are strong in Kurdistan and social networks in Iraq and Kurdistan. So when you have millions of Kurds, Yazidis, and other Kurds have migrated abroad, these social networks don't just get lost, they are continuous. And people will, in Kurdistan, when they see an opportunity, when they have this network and connection, they will seek migration, especially if they hear that the situation in Europe is pretty great. Like the situation in Europe is very good. And that again comes to the image that the migrants in Europe demonstrate, which might not be very realistic. And I've seen these dynamics myself, being in Europe, being in North America, being a migrant myself to United States. And for me, that was the important part, the status. The status that, you know, when I can have my freedom of expression in Kurdistan, I can have the job, that connection abroad gives me some status. For better or worse, that dynamic have, in my opinion, a very high contribution to why the migration from Kurdistan is more than the rest of Iraq. Yeah, so that answers somehow the difference between Kurdistan and Iraq migration. Yeah, why? It's a very excellent question by Dobroslava about why there is Asian, Bangladesh, people from Bangladesh working in the, for example, waste management sector. We have people working even in restaurants and coffee shops and from Asia. I mean, and yet you have people migrating for economic reasons. It's quite a discrepancy, and this has to do with, again, with the culture and the status issue that I've raised. Many people in Kurdistan, in Duhoq, they because they see that differences in the distribution of wealth, they are hesitant, or they just simply don't agree to take certain type of jobs, and that's why you either have to pay them more and have these jobs more socially acceptable, or the other option that the government and the private sector take is, well, let's bring cheaper labor. And cheaper labor from where? From the regions in the world that are most living in poverty and are economically hit. And that's the second is usually the choice that the private sector and the government takes, which is quite unfortunate. So instead of giving more prestige to these type of jobs that are there, and you have thousands of people from Asia working in these jobs, instead of actually having more, making them more socially acceptable, and also have a little bit more acceptable paycheck assigned to these jobs, so you can have people, local people, actually taking them. No, they just take the easier route. Yeah, I mean, for Carol's question about the refugees and their legal status, again, Lansens mentioned it quite. I cannot put it better, but that's the struggle. Also, the government has to take with such a high unemployment rate, and also having to accommodate all these refugees. We have in Duhoq alone 500,000 refugees and IDPs. If you allow, which is the case, there are no restriction to private jobs, but for government jobs and for equalizing their, for example, they have college certificate, it's a barrier. The government doesn't recognize their certificates or their access to any government job opportunity. But they can still work with NGOs, maybe with some private sectors. For example, there are many Syrian refugees who work in restaurants, and because again, it goes back to this cheaper labor, because they can actually pay less. And this is in a way annoys and the local people, you know. I have friends, for example, who were working in restaurants and they were paid quite well, relatively, but with this flooding of influx of refugees and people from abroad, and just taking those jobs for the minimum possible wage, you could not access decent salary in this, a decent paycheck in these jobs. So that combined with this frustration of distribution of wealth, high unemployment pushes people to seek a better status. And you know, the first look they have, okay, we have relatives from abroad, from Germany. You know that in Germany they are, even if they don't work, they get a decent paycheck. This is the image that is being transferred to them. Then they would sell their property. They will have any income they have to pay for their migration. This happens to at least 2 of my relatives who have gone through this journey to abroad, and one of them actually lost everything, and he was not successful to migrate. He came back with even worse, worse condition, because he lost all his basically savings. And one made it to one country in the Europe, and so on. So these are just examples. So these are all these complexity of conditions that actually combined with this refugee situation. And again, the lack of capacity in the government is also another big issue. So the government itself lacks capacity to administer these issues, to manage these issues. You know, one of them, when I talked about the land use planning issues, because that's my field, I see all the service or the planning institution, municipalities. One of the reasons I left the municipalities is because there is really poor capacity to how to develop our cities, to develop our economic situation, and so on. So yeah, I think what Rashid mentioned is quite true, and despite for me it's being sensitive, I cannot go to every detail, pointing fingers on some issues, but we have a lot of problems with not the obvious corruption, the corruption that is, you can, people, the corruption by government employee has been reduced to the minimum. We have some systematic corruption, and for the lack of better term, it's when you have private entities and the government it's not a free market. When the government intervene in every sector of every private sector, every private investment. For example, if there is any investment in the agricultural field, it would not be freely open to anyone to invest. Usually there has to be some ties from high up, and there has to be some share, and that's quite not friendly for private sector development. You have to leave the market open. So anyone whether internal to Kurdistan or Iraq or external can invest without all these. You have to satisfy others. That's the most I can say in that regard. Yeah. So yeah, that combined with all those combined, people are, lose faith. Another big issue is we have even not pretty much trusting the government. Myself and all my colleagues, all the government employees, at any time you might not receive your salary, and during not only COVID time but even during ISIS time. And whenever there is a simple economic crisis or a crisis between the central Iraqi government and Kurdistan government, you might be not paid for 3 months, for 6 months. And those payments are not repaid. They are just, and you're not told that these are savings. They're just gone. So when you are in those situations, the trust for the government just diminishes more and more. And for that reason, people will seek something more stable, which is, the first thing comes to mind is to migrate.
Thank you, Bashir, for this extensive answers and also for stressing with your last sentences the importance of the economy and how volatile sort of situation internally can push people to migration. And one of the subjects that hasn't emerged yet, you've just touched it at the very end, but I would be interested if you could elaborate a little bit more on the impact of pandemic on the situation in Iraq, and how this could possibly influence internal and especially external migration. So you mentioned that for example, the government employees were not being paid, and then the payments, the salaries were never paid to them. This is very interesting. If you could say a little bit more about that, how many people were affected by this kind of situation. And also, just to return to this element of the crisis at the Polish, Belarusian-Lithuanian border, and the interesting case that you also mentioned about people also linking with economy, that they are investing, that they are not the poorest that make the decision. You have to invest, you have to have the money to do this journey, and that a lot of people are losing savings as a result, so they are getting even more impoverished in a way as a result of it. And then and what for me it's very the clearest sort of examples of stigma in a way attached with the unsuccessful migration is the situation when they show these people returning, these flights which are organized by Iraqi government, and then people who are moving out of the airports, who are being filmed, they are covering their faces. It's a kind of a situation that you may see for people who are being tried for in the courts, and they kind of try to cover their faces in a way that this is I think it is quite symbolic as well, showing the stigma of unfulfilled sort of dreams of migration and reaching families, friends in Europe. So just this couple of things. If there are any other questions, please raise your hands because I don't see any raised hands, or ask the questions on chat. This is the last sort of chance to ask the questions, and then we'll be wrapping up and closing the seminar. Bashir, in the meantime, you can answer, Bashir.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. Yeah, for the end payment, the unpaid salaries, that went pretty long in the pandemic. There was about 8 months of salaries unpaid, and there is a term for it, pashkout. Pashkout means something you've for later. It's not you don't have anywhere because Kurdistan and Iraq doesn't have a banking system. That's another problem. So everything is paid cash, and you don't have anywhere that indicates that you have this balance somewhere. So what the government, the term used is pashkout, meaning something just gone for later. And that later is indefinite. It's indeterministic. It's gone. So we all know they're here that this is something we will never get paid for it. It's gone. And it also happened during ISIS. And it's pretty much tied to the oil. When you have crisis, you don't have oil exports. When you don't have oil export, you don't have 90% of your revenues. Then you cannot simply pay your employee. It's as simple as that. And that's why economic diversity is a must. It's too late, but it's a must-do economic step by the government of Kurdistan and Iraq. And there has been initiative in 2018 with the World Bank attempts to diversify the economy. There is a huge report by World Bank in cooperation with the Kurdistan government, Ministry of Planning, about how ways policies to diversify the economy. But again, when you don't have government capacity, no matter how beautiful your report is, nothing's gonna be done. And that's exactly what is going on. So that is one of the reasons people have lost trust even more with the government. As you know, the government should have something simply saying that, okay, you have these balance, you can look it up online or somewhere, that yeah, we recognize that you are not paid. These are preserved privileges or rights that you will be compensated when the time comes, but nothing. And that's quite problematic. In terms of, yes, what people losing their properties for the immigrant who stuck. Yeah, I was discussing with many of my colleagues, and we were looking at those footages of those people. We were actually, the first thing we say that, why are they there? Why they have migrated? I mean, they are really not in desperate situation. Yes, we have problems. Yes, we have so much dissatisfaction with the government, but we are not in poverty at the same time. We can, in general, even for those who have, the people I know who have migrated, and I push some blame to European countries of the image they illustrate, at least people who are there, of how much immigration changes in one person's life. I think that image is rosy more than it should be, in a way, and that's the image that the immigrants in European country also illustrate to their relatives or their friend, which is unfortunate because, you know, I've been in Germany, I've seen the situation of many migrants there. They're not in really good condition, many of them. So I think those aspects should be demonstrated, should be put out there in the public, so people know that this is not as simple as you think it is. When you migrate, you might fail not only for your migration process, but also you might fail when you're there. I mean, in Germany, for example, 50% of the migrants don't even get past their language tests. That's what the figure I just knew about a few months ago, when I was in Germany. So, yeah, the part of stigma is a part of that. When you have all these hopes built up that when you go there, you're gonna be way better off, you're gonna be freer, you can do so well in your life, and then you are put back to Iraq in a plane, then yes, that's a stigma. At least that's how you feel. And that's how people in our society will look at you, as a failure. And yeah, so people definitely cover their faces. But again, it's all based on, I think there are many false hope that are demonstrated, or at least brought about, information brought to our people here in Kurdistan and Iraq and in general about how of a life-changing experience migration is gonna be. So I think we should, we take some responsibility of that. We have to illustrate all these complexities and all these problems that migrants themselves in European countries suffer from and experience. And I've heard from many colleagues in Germany that they actually, for them, the migrants are not the assets, it's their offspring is what they hope for. So you see, when you go there, they're actually not hoping that you will make any difference. And it's just your offspring. When they get into this, at least in Germany, the German institution, when they do well in schools and they brought up as German, then they can actually contribute to the society. But you as an immigrant, more likely are not to do anything substantial, or probably would just live a very normal life. So I think that's missing. That picture is missing from the migration report or study. Some people should know this. And another important thing that I also see, many people would like to migrate because they cannot simply travel. So the mobility, international mobility is, for Iraqi especially, is close to zero, because it's the second worst passport in the world. And people would like to have freedom to travel somewhere when they would like to. At least that freedom to travel will open their eyes to look into the societies, to look into how is life there. Maybe many of them, they won't, when they travel just simply for traveling, they won't have that stigma of returning. But if you go as an immigrant, you would do desperate thing not to return because of that stigma. So
thank you very much, Bashir.
Yeah,
this is really very important insight. We've seen exactly the same kind of situation in Tunisia. How people are desperate to leave, that they are ready to risk their life in the sea if it takes their life because of this desperation. A very important point that you made about the freedom of movement. So in the case of Tunisia, the opening moment, the opening time was straight after the Jasmine Revolution, and we have even in our interviews information about people who said, like, yeah, we freed ourselves from the dictator in order to be able to free to move. So we are free to move to Europe now. It's part of our freedom. We want to be able to freely move to other country as well. So it is very interesting, this sort of freedom narrative, how people embrace it, and in a way how this carries them into difficult situations on the borderlands between different countries. So thank you very much for bringing this up, Bashir. We are coming to an end. So if anybody wants to make, Lancinet or Rashid Zand wants to make some last statements, words, this is the time. Rashid, you want to say something yet, or? All right, okay, that's fine. So once again, thank you very much to all for being with us today. I know how busy time this is before at the end, second half of December. Many thanks for joining in, and please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, wherever we are, on YouTube, with information about the next seminars, which will be devoted to case studies. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really.
Mas salama. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khaled.
Thank you.
Bye.
Assalamu. Thank you very much. Bye.